Alright, my friends. Now that I've watched the Revenant Hill trailer a few hundred times, and read some speculation from other folks on the internet, I'm at last ready to dive into some theory crafting myself. So let's take a look at the trailer frame by frame, break it down, and see what we can learn from it. First, we see the awesome new logo for the Glory Society, along with a beautiful night sky. If you look closely, you'll notice some dusk stars, the ones that May looked at in Night in the Woods with Mr. Chazikov, so we might see those coming back around in some form. We also see a few mapped out constellations. I spent a good bit of time bouncing between the trailer, the hangout with Angus, and the longest night, and I did manage to identify one of the constellations. This one is Mundi, the world fish, or the whale with the world on its back. It's different than the longest night version of the constellation, but it lines up perfectly with the one from Angus's hangout up at Possum Jump. Given that we'll be tasked with starting a new, egalitarian community, I think this constellation's inclusion is pretty appropriate, as it sounds like Twigs will, quite literally, have a small section of the world on their back by the end of the game. It also hints at a shared cosmology between the two games. So if you're of the belief that Revenant Hill is going to turn out to be a Night in the Woods prequel, then there's a point in your favor. Next, we get the shot of the trailer that has spawned the most discussion so far, and will surely continue to do so in the months ahead. Here, we get our first look at our protagonist, Twigs, who bears an undeniable resemblance to May. They have the same eyes, the same fur color, and similar ear notches. Twigs is standing atop an overturned statue of Saint Rebello, the fire pope seen in every Constellation segment, Mr. Chazikov's, Longest Night, and Angus's hangout. There was also a statue of him outside the church, of course, but if you look closely, you can tell that it's not the exact same statue. The statue in Night in the Woods had just 4 fingers. This one has 5, and the eyes are different. I think you can look at this one of 2 ways. It might just be a design update. The Glory Society has every right to change things game to game as they see fit. Or, it's possible that this isn't actually Saint Rebello at all, and is instead the rival pope who Saint Rebello set fire to and then consumed, at least according to the legends. If so, it would definitely help explain why the statue was overturned and abandoned. It is, quite literally, the iconography of a defeated heretic. I love this theory, but I think there's something else that they're going for here with this image. So put a pin in that one. I'll circle back to it later. Anyway, back to the frame. We also see a factory in the background, calling to mind the scenery of Possum Springs. All in all, it's a frame that is chock full of Night in the Woods references, to the point where I can't blame anyone for speculating that Revenant Hill is secretly a prequel or a sequel. But Scott Benson has been very clear in saying that Revenant Hill is not Night in the Woods 2, and is instead something entirely new. So why then would the Glory Society fill the first major frame of their trailer with references to Night in the Woods, to the point where anyone who hasn't seen his tweets would naturally assume that Revenant Hill is deeply connected to the story of May and Possum Springs? There are a lot of good theories out there, none of which I'm going to dismiss. We've got a long way to go till release, and I see nothing wrong with some harmless speculation. But what I think is going on here is that Revenant Hill is a true spiritual successor, a game that will take the things that the developers loved about Night in the Woods and wanted to keep from it, and remix it into a brand new title. In a way, it almost reminds me of what Hideo Kojima did after PT got scrapped. He took a horror game that featured Norman Reedus, Guillermo del Toro, and a weird baby, and turned it into Death Stranding, which featured Norman Reedus, Guillermo del Toro, and a weird baby. I'm not saying that the Glory Society is taking a page out of Kojima's Playbook. They have very different development styles, but the core philosophy of taking what worked before and transforming it into something different is definitely similar. I might be wrong, but that's what makes the most sense to me. From here on out, things go by pretty quickly as Twigs traverses what I presume to be the landscapes of the lower north. Here, we see them run through a pumpkin patch in the early morning, past a character I've taken to calling Birthday Bear, on account of the party hat he's wearing. Based on the fact that we see Birthday Bear standing up in the promotional image, I'm guessing that he's probably sentient, at least to some degree. Next, Twigs heads through a field during a storm, where they are eventually greeted by a witch riding a pitchfork. I think it's safe to assume that this is our witch, the one we'll be trying to become a familiar for. I say this based on the promotional image, where Twig seems to be doing a job for her. One thing that stands out to me about our witch is that she's riding a pitchfork instead of the usual broom. It could be just a stylistic choice, but I see two thematic possibilities with this as well. Based on what the blog says about starting an egalitarian community and the implications of labor strife being a major storyline, it sure looks like one of the game's major themes will be the upending of traditional power structures. Our witch using a pitchfork is an example of this. A pitchfork is a farm tool, but stereotypically, it's also a weapon used by angry mobs, often to hunt down witches. So for our witch to be riding one, instead of being attacked by someone wielding one, is quite a reversal, which serves to further reinforce this theme. Also, it could simply indicate that she herself is a farmer. In an egalitarian community, there's no room for anyone to strictly be a boss. Everyone has to help out. Everyone has to pull their weight. Everyone has to collaborate and to contribute. So no matter the power she might wield as a witch, if this is truly a community of equals, then she has to lend a hand, and her pitchfork broomstick might be a nod towards that. Just before the background shifts, we see what looks like the ruins of a building in the distance. This might be the barn where Twigs was living until it burned down. It doesn't quite look like a barn though. Seems like a standard early 20th century farmhouse, so I'm not certain about this. From there, Twigs runs through a cornfield, where we see two of the other characters from the promotional image. They're carrying a log, presumably to the community we'll be building. The man at the front has a bit of a John Henry vibe to him, with a cool hat and a top-notch beard, while the second man seems to be quite a bit younger. I could see John Henry being the strong handyman of the group, and the young farmer one of those down-on-his-luck 20-somethings that the team portrayed so well in Night in the Woods. There's also a train in the background, again calling to mind the signature imagery of Possum Springs. Still in the cornfield, Twigs passes by another pair of characters from the promotional image. A skeleton wearing a farmer's hat, and a well-dressed woman holding up a mushroom. The skeleton is noteworthy, as it's the first truly undead character we've seen in one of the Glory Society's games. Sure, we've seen ghosts, and there's all kinds of spooky theories about Ide, but a skeleton is a step beyond all of that. Given his hat and pitchfork, he's probably a farmer, but I'll be curious to see if he's a silent construct created by our witch to help around the community, or if he's a fully realized, sentient character. Given the game's themes, I'm guessing it's the latter. As for the second character in this frame, from her glasses, to her outfit, to the way she's inspecting the mushroom, she gives off some professorial vibes to me. I wouldn't be surprised if Professor Mushroom turns out to be our resident doctor. Every community needs one, after all, so maybe she's gathering shrooms to make medicine, or to help our witch with some potions. Passing through the cornfield, we see another skeleton. This one is dancing, which is probably a sign that they are indeed sentient. And in the distance, if you look closely, you'll see the woman who's holding a gun in the promotional image, up on the hill. We don't see her up close in this trailer, but given that she's the only character carrying a firearm, and considering her positioning on the hill, she's probably the marshal of this town. It's another role that a small community, especially at a time like this, does need. And if we're going to have any chance of confronting the dark forces of the lower north, I'm sure we'll need Miss Marshall at our side. Now, aside from the first shot of the trailer, this is the one that I think will prompt the most discussion. Here, we see a fire on a hill, with shadowy figures dancing and floating around it, and what looks like other witches and warlocks in the foreground. Notably, while we do see some figures in traditional witches' garb, we also see what appear to be humanoid animals. A crocodile, a bird, and a dog. Just like in Night in the Woods. I suppose they could be masks, but they sure look like real faces to me. So if you are of the opinion that Revenant Hill is a Night in the Woods prequel, here's some evidence for your theory. But considering that we don't see any other humanoid animals in the trailer, other than maybe Birthday Bear, and considering that there are no humans in Night in the Woods, I'm having trouble believing this one. I suppose Revenant Hill could be about the fall of humans and the rise of animals, but that just doesn't seem like the type of story the Glory Society wants to tell here. Their games are about the problems of everyday people, with a touch of the grandiose, not epic urban fantasy. I could be totally wrong about that, but I just don't see it. As for the Hill with the Fire itself, this is probably the Revenant Hill, the namesake of the game. In traditional fantasy, a Revenant is a person who comes back from the dead, so I think it's safe to say that this hill has some kind of supernatural aura that can raise the dead. At the top of the hill is a tree that reminds me quite a bit of the Whispering Hillock from The Witcher 3. In that game, the Whispering Hillock is essentially an embodiment of Mother Nature, mixed with all the macabre elements and folklore-inspired twists you'd expect from that universe. I could see the hill serving as a similar force in this game, an entity of the natural world that gives and takes in equal measure. The scenery then changes entirely, as Twigs enters an early 20th century town, where we get a peek at what, I suspect, will be one of the game's major themes: the struggles of workers against their bosses, the plight of the common man to have a job that not only provides for them and their family, but looks after and supports them as well. Here, we see a crowd of striking factory workers facing off with a squad of armed guards who turn their weapons on them just before Twigs exits the frame. If I were to take a guess at the big picture, endgame plot of Revenant Hill, I'd bet it will have to do with the repercussions of this image right here. No doubt, this has to do with the dark forces brewing in the lower north that the PlayStation blog mentions. I mean, think about it. If we're building an egalitarian community, then naturally, our enemy would be a capitalist power structure run by an oppressive boss that's abusing his workers. In Night in the Woods, we saw a MAGA death cult make sacrifices to the Black Goat in exchange for keeping the town prosperous. What if in Revenant Hill, we instead find a group of factory bosses, robber barons, if you will, who make sacrifices to another entity in exchange for greater profits? Again, I'm just speculating, but it seems like a natural way for the Glory Society to continue to expand and evolve their core themes. In the penultimate frame, Twigs runs past what appears to be a fireplace in a wooded area. Given it's implied to be beneath Revenant Hill, it's possible that this fireplace is what powers the magical forces of the hill, or it could be a nod to the fire that forces Twigs to move out of the barn, and it's just placed here as a convenient shot to set up the final frame. In the final frame, we see Twigs, with our witch on his left, Skeleton Farmer on his right, at the top of Revenant Hill, sitting in the shade of the big tree. Further to the right, there's another animal. I think it's a possum, but I'm not certain, wearing a hat, which is yet another sign that there will indeed be more sentient animals in this game than our protagonist. Below them, some farmers, including another skeleton, are working the field, and a windmill rises off in the distance. I'm guessing this is probably our community, and that Twigs, our witch, and Skeleton Farmer are taking a well-deserved break from the day's work. Finally, we get a title screen, followed by the game's tagline, "Rise Together," which is simply a perfect catchphrase when you consider the game's themes of building an egalitarian community and standing up for the rights of workers. And there you have it, folks, a complete breakdown of every shot in the trailer to Revenant Hill. In my next video about Revenant Hill, we'll take a look at the promotional images and see what we can learn from them, and talk about a character who is mentioned in the blog, but is conspicuously absent from all of this material. In the meantime, subscribe for more content on Night in the Woods and other narrative games. Next week, I'll be dropping my second video about Germ, followed by my first video essay about Fall of Porcupine. Huge thanks to Wolf Godwin for allowing me to use their awesome piano covers of the Night in the Woods soundtrack for this video. You can check out all of Wolf Godwin's music and their incredible animations by clicking on the link in the description box. See you guys next time.